Why is it that you can hear all of these languages, but only some of them make sense to you? In this video, we'll focus on answering one big main question. Why are there so many languages in the world? But in order to do that, we'll need to answer some other questions along the way. First of all, what is language? Language is the ability to use symbols, signs, and sounds to express our inner thoughts to the outer world. This language ability lives inside our brain. Some people even argue that our brains contain a special language organ whose sole purpose is to process and produce language. Even though we all have this same ability, there are many ways it can be expressed. Currently, it's estimated that there are more than 7,000 languages spoken across the globe. So how do languages form? If we want to understand why there are so many languages now, it's important to think about how languages change. This is because many languages that seem very different on the surface actually came from the same root. Because of the human language ability, anytime there are people living together in a community, they will find a way to communicate with each other and ultimately develop their own language. In places where physical or even social barriers kept communities apart, more languages developed. But isolation can happen even without these barriers. To illustrate this, look at where the most languages are spoken. Languages aren't uniformly distributed across the globe, but instead cluster in temperate climates. These are places where, because the temperatures are comfortable and the conditions are good for growing, people have everything they need where they are. A theory called the ecological risk hypothesis claims that when an environment poses less of a risk to humans, they are less dependent on migration to support their needs. As a result, more isolated communities can sustain themselves, leading to more languages overall. But something that's important to know is that language is always changing, even within communities. Sometimes one generation says something one way, but over time might start to skip certain syllables. Then maybe the next generation invents their own custom slang, which eventually makes its way into the standard version of the language. Things as silly as mishearing a word can also change a language. For example, in Old English, you'd have called this little lizard an oot, but so many people misheard this as a newt that the mistaken version totally supplanted the original one in modern English. This sort of change in language that happens over time is referred to as diachronic change by linguists. Change can also happen when two cultures who speak differently come into contact with one another. For instance, two cultures might start borrowing each other's words for things, and then use a mix of the two languages to do their best to communicate. Eventually, this mix can become stable and function as a native language all its own. But what even counts as a language? Remember that number, 7,000? Where does this number come from? In reality, what is and isn't considered its own language often has more to do with socio-political context than it does with any one feature of the language itself. For example, people who speak Bosnian can understand what people who speak Serbian are saying, and vice versa, but they are still considered different languages because of their complex political history. These sorts of situations led to a phrase famous among linguists: a language is a dialect with an army and a navy. For this reason, when we try to count how many languages there are, we have to just do the best we can. So generally, we use the measure of mutual intelligibility. This is when two people speaking to one another can understand each other, even if the sounds that they use to convey their ideas are slightly different. Why does this matter? 7,000 languages, that's a lot. And it can make it pretty hard to communicate, especially when you're dealing across different cultures, societies, or geographic locations. Would it be better if we all just spoke the same language? Well, certainly people have tried to make this happen, but the thing is, different languages are much more like naturally evolving organisms than they are like structures we can rigidly control. In fact, linguistic diversity, or the various ways in which languages differ across the world, is really valuable and important. Language is deeply intertwined with historical and cultural identity. It can often, through its very structure, reveal deep insights about the communities it comes from. Preserving native languages is an essential way to celebrate the cultural autonomy and self-expression of all individuals. Like with endangered species, we hope to protect those languages that are at risk of extinction. And scientifically, studying endangered languages gives us valuable insight into how our world and our biology works. By looking at what is shared across all the human languages, we can gain insights into the human language ability, and that way learn more about what it means to be human. When we protect linguistic diversity, we help to protect not only the speakers of all 7,000 of the world's languages, but also the opportunity to study the vibrant tree of human language and to learn about all of the beautiful, flowering, intertwining ways its branches can grow.